Part 72. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 712. Tang Ning was very confident in Lao Zheng's strength. Although the old beggar often eliminated and pushed against him, he never denied his strength. According to Tang Ning's understanding, he has already stood at the pinnacle of martial arts in this world. If he takes one step further, he will reach the level of transcendence and sainthood. The level of the old beggar cannot be achieved by one's own efforts at all. It is God's favoritism, and only one monster will appear among hundreds of millions. Apart from the old beggar, Tang Ning had never seen anyone who could survive 3 moves under old Zheng. Wang Yanyan's master, that middle-aged woman, could trade blows with old Zheng for a quarter of an hour. Based on this alone, Tang Ning no longer had any doubts about her former title as the #1 warrior of the prairies. Clang. After countless collisions between the scimitar and the butcher's knife, old Zheng took 2 steps back. The middle-aged woman also took 2 steps back, but her figure did not stand as firm as old Zheng. After shaking, she stepped back again. He took half a step to steady himself, and an abnormal blush appeared on his face. Lao Zheng put the butcher's knife behind his waist, cupped his hands and said, "I accept." The middle-aged woman put away her scimitar, raised her hand, and said, "Your sword skills are unrivaled in the world." Lao Zheng smiled and said, "There is no such thing as invincibility. The world is huge, and I am just a frog at the bottom of a well." The two started fighting as soon as they met. Tang Ning thought she could dig up Lao Zheng's past, but she didn't expect that it was just the mutual attraction between masters. These masters who have reached the pinnacle of martial arts will naturally generate a kind of momentum in their bodies. This kind of momentum cannot be felt by ordinary people, but in the eyes of masters of the same level, they are undoubtedly the morning stars in the dark night sky, and they can be defeated by one glance. Find it in the sea. From the previous competition, it was obvious that old Zheng was still better, but her skills were limited. This woman was the most powerful expert that Tang Ning had ever seen, besides old beggar and old Zheng. Judging from the fact that she could fight against Lao Zheng for so long, Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying combined were not enough for her to make a few cuts. The middle-aged woman withdrew her eyes from Lao Zheng, looked at Wang Yanyan, and asked, "What do you want from me this time?" Wang Yanyan said sheepishly, "Yanner has something to ask master for help." The middle-aged woman took out a piece of cloth from her arms, wiped the scimitar carefully, and said, "What's the matter? Tell me." Wang Yanyan pointed at Tang Ning and said, "I want master to accept him as his disciple." The middle-aged woman didn't even raise her head and said, "After you, I won't accept any disciples, let alone men." Aina stepped forward and advised, "Master must help the princess this time, otherwise the eldest prince and the third prince will force her to marry." The middle-aged woman said expressionlessly, "It's time for men to get married, and it's time for women to get married. At her age, it's time to get married." Aina thought for a while and said, "But if she marries someone, the Wen tribe will fall into the hands of the eldest prince and the third prince. By then, everyone will not have a good life." Aina seemed to have touched the middle-aged woman's heart. He frowned, then glanced at Tang Ning and said, "Even if he can participate in the competition, he is no match for Butai." Tang Ning held up her hands and said, "Senior, you can rest assured. If I have the confidence to participate in the competition, I will naturally have the confidence to win." "That's your business." The middle-aged woman glanced at him, turned around and walked into the tent. Wanyanyan and Ayana looked at each other and quickly followed in. This middle-aged woman is obviously a very principled person, and when her martial arts reaches their level, she is very stubborn and it is difficult for ordinary people to change their minds. If Tang Ning couldn't win Wanyanyan through a competition, the price Chengguo would have to pay to solve the grassland's troubles would be hundreds and thousands of times higher. Lao Zheng looked at the butcher knife in his hand, shook his head and said, "What a pity. Tang Ning saw that the blade of the knife was already full of gaps and said, "Go back and give you a new one." Lao Zheng shook his head and said, "No, it can still be used if you grind it." Tang Ning glanced inside the tent, looked at him, and asked, "How does that woman compare to you?" "It's only half a pound." Old Zheng squatted on the ground, took out the whetstone, dipped some water in it and began to sharpen the knife. He said with some amazement, "I didn't expect to meet such a master in a place like this." What the old beggar said is true. There are people outside the world, and there is a sky outside the sky. I used to sit in a well and look at the sky. Thinking of what the old beggar said, Tang Ning asked curiously, "The old beggar also said that it would take you another 100 years of practice to catch up with him. Is that true?" Old Zheng asked, "What else did the old beggar say?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "He said that you have already mastered the art of swordsmanship, and when you have mastered it to the point where no sword is better than having a sword, everything can be a sword, and you are the sword yourself, he will no longer be your opponent. It is better to have no sword than to have a sword. Everything can be a sword, and you are the sword. What is the explanation?" Hearing the voice coming from behind, Tang Ning turned around and looked at the middle-aged woman who was deep in thought. After being stunned for a moment, she continued, "When you practice the art of swordsmanship to a high level, you will no longer be stagnant in things. Plants, trees, bamboos, and stones can be used as objects. Sword, as for the fact that no sword is better than having a sword, it is the highest state of sword art." The middle-aged woman looked at him and asked, "Do you know how to use knives?" "I don't understand." "This is what a senior said." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Before the senior was weak, he used a sharp and powerful green steel sword to defeat all the heroes in the world, and then used a with 100 jin heavy sword. He has no rival in the world. At the age of 40, he no longer clings to objects, and can use plants, trees, bamboos, and stones as swords. From then on, he refined himself and reached the point where no sword is better than a sword." He looked at the middle-aged woman and said, "This senior is a swordsman, but I think that swords are all weapons, and there are similarities in their approach. If I am wrong, senior, please bear with me." When the middle-aged woman was lost in thought, Tang Ning continued, "This senior practiced swordsmanship. He first pursued various technical sword moves, and then used a sharp edgeless heavy sword to defeat all kinds of magic with one force. After mastering the art of swordsmanship, he became one with the sword. There is no sword in the hand, but there is a sword in the heart. He said that only by putting down the sword in the hand can one pick up the sword in the heart." The middle-aged woman pondered for a long time, her eyes becoming more confused, but a trace of excitement appeared on her face, as if she had some realization. Even Lao Zheng had a thoughtful expression on his face. After a while, the middle-aged woman came back to her senses, looked at Tang Ning again, and said, "I agree to your matter." "That's great," Wan Yanyan said happily, "Thank you, master." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Thank you, senior." He didn't expect that the matter would be solved so easily. He had just had a casual chat with old Zheng, and happened to remember a few words the old beggar said at that time. As for the following ones, they are all just fooling around. Who has watched Jin Yang's martial arts since childhood? Who can't say a few words about this? If he had known that she would have agreed after just a few words of deception, he could have memorized a few more sections of the 9-yin manual and the palm of sadness and ecstasy. Only when you put down the sword in your hand can you pick up the sword in your heart. This senior's realm will be difficult for me to reach in my lifetime." The middle-aged woman murmured, looked at him, and asked, "Dare you ask the senior swordsman? Name taboo." Tang Ning looked at her and said seriously, "His name is Dugukaiubai. Of course, you can also call him Sword Demon." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 713. The Wanyan tribe unified the Sushan tribe, and Wanyan Yan was the princess of the Wanyan tribe. She should have been held high in the clouds, with unlimited glory, but that was not what Tang Ning saw. Her two brothers both wanted to kill her and then kill her, and her two masters were not very kind to her. She had been with Gong Sun Ying for so long, but Gong Sun Ying had never even taught her the basics of Gu art, so she pestered Tang Ning to teach her how to make her legs weak. And this middle-aged woman, whose swordsmanship was as good as that of old Zheng, didn't care about her being forced into marriage, and didn't seem to care about her that much. If Tang Ning hadn't been quick to think, this matter would still have not been resolved yet. Everyone in the world is close, but no one is close to him. Speaking of which, she is just a poor person. When several people were riding back, Wang Yanyan looked at him, hummed twice, and said, "Don't think that I haven't watched the legend of the Condor heroes and swordsmen. There is no Tugu at all. Chu defeat this person, these are all stories you made up." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "It's not me, it's Tang Ning Ning." "You still want to lie to me?" Wang Yanyan glanced at him and said disdainfully, "I have read all Tang Ning Ning's books. I also asked the bookseller, and they said you are Tang Ning Ning." In Chen country, Tang Ning's trumpet had been exposed a long time ago. Unexpectedly, even Wang Yanyan knew about it. Since she exposed it, Tang Ning didn't bother to explain and said, "The situation is urgent. If I don't make up a story, you just wait to marry the men of the eldest prince and the third prince. I don't blame you." Wang Yanyan rode forward and asked, "Did you also write the story of Yishan?" Tang Ning corrected, "It's Tang Ning Ning." Wang Yanyan asked expectantly, "Then who did he end up with?" Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, "Don't you know?" Speaking of this matter, Wang Yanyan gritted her teeth and said, "That profiteer, I want all the books, but he only gave me the first volume of the story of Yishan and not the second volume." She looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "Who did Zhang Wuji end up with later on, Xiao Zhao, Zhiruo, Zhu Er, or Zhao Min?" Tang Ning said, "Zhao Min." That prairie princess. Wang Yanyan was stunned for a moment and asked, "Why not Zhiruo and Xiao Zhao?" She should ask Mr. Jin this question instead of Tang Ning. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I just like Princess Prairie." "Why do you care so much?" Wang Yanyan was so happy that she couldn't help but curl her lips. She looked at Tang Ning and asked, "If it were you, who would you choose?" Childish Tang Ning glanced at her and said, "Only children make choices." Wang Yanyan didn't know what happened, but she suddenly became happy, riding her horse around on the grassland, singing a song that Tang Ning didn't understand. In fact, Tang Ning envied her such a state of mind. She had no scheming, her happiness and anger were all on her face. She was crying one second and laughing the next. This is actually human nature, but as she grows up, these natures will also change. Gradually disappear. Lao Zhang fell into silence from the beginning. At a certain moment, he suddenly turned to look at Tang Ning and asked, "Every tree, bamboo, and stone can be used as a knife. It is better to have a knife without a knife. If there is no knife in the hand, there is a knife in the heart." These words are what old Zheng said. "Did the beggar teach you?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "What, you also have some enlightenment?" Lao Zheng glanced at him and said calmly, "If she doesn't use a knife, I can chop her in 3 moves. There is a reason why Lao Zheng could not beat the old beggar. Not only because he did not live long enough, but also because his vision, knowledge of martial arts were not as good as the old beggar. When he was young, the old beggar fought all over the world and gathered hundreds of schools of thought. Director, there is no reason for his knowledge to be inferior to that of a pig butcher. However, whether the old beggar is right or old Zheng is right, this is not important. What is important is that Wang Yanyan's master believes it, and they are now signing up on behalf of the Wen tribe." Tang Ning thought about it more than once, why he always did this kind of thing to destroy other people's marriages. Zhou Yi, Zhao Man, Li Tianlan, Wanyan, he has been in this world for 4 years and has destroyed someone else's marriage on average once a year. According to the saying that it is better to demolish a temple than a marriage, he has already demolished many temples. This time, the eldest prince is responsible for selecting the bravest warrior on the grassland for Wanyan to get married. The registration and competition will be held at the main Wanyan headquarters. Registration is based on tribes. To show fairness, each tribe can only select one warrior to participate, but at the same time, they can select 2 more people to assist. These 2 people can be male or female. Tang Ning represents the Wen tribe. Assisting him were Aina and another woman named Ayu. Chen Chu used to call the grassland barbarian, but in fact, there are some advanced ideas on the grassland, which are worth learning from Chen Chu. On the grassland, everything is based on strength, and the preference for boys over girls is not so obvious. The leaders of many tribes are women, and their former first warriors were also women. The main department of Wanyan Department. In a tent somewhere, a man in charge of recording glanced at Tang Ning, looked at Ayana, and said, "Don't you have anyone in your Wen tribe? Why would you let a Han compete?" Ayana glanced at him and asked, "I am also Han, do you have any questions?" Naturally, the man didn't dare to say there was a problem. Although Ayana was Han, she had grown up on the grassland since she was a child. She was no different from them. What's more, she was a disciple of that big shot, someone who even the big prince didn't want to mess with. Of course he didn't dare. Of course there is no problem with Iina. The man glanced at her, retracted his neck, and said, "But he can't, he is a Han Chinese, and Han Chinese cannot participate in the competition." Iina said, "He used to be a Han Chinese, but now he is a member of my Wen tribe." The man shook his head and said, "That won't work either." Iina thought for a while and said, "My master has accepted him as a disciple. He is my junior brother. My master asked him to represent the Wen tribe to participate in the competition. If you think there is a problem, how about I let my master explain it to you?" The man trembled after hearing this and said, This I have to ask the eldest prince." The king in the tent, he frowned after hearing what the man said, and said, "Why is she here to join in the fun?" Butai looked at him and said, "Don't worry, prince. With Hanel and I here, even Iina, the first warrior of their Wen tribe, can't make trouble, let alone a Han Chinese. For such a small matter, I don't know if she would provoke that person." The prince thought about it, considered it, and nodded, "I'll leave this matter to you." After a while, the man looked at Iina and said, "Okay, the competition will start in 5 days, you just need to come 1 day in advance." Iina took a sign, looked at Tang Ning, and walked out of the tent. On the way back to Wen tribe, Tang Ning looked at Iina and asked, "What will this competition be?" Iina said, "There are 3 competitions in total. One is riding, the second is archery, and the third is a martial arts competition. You and I can help you with the first 2, but you can only rely on yourself for the third. The competition of the grassland people is naturally very grassland style. They have been practicing riding and archery since childhood. In addition, they also advocate martial arts. The selection of sons-in-law is also a comprehensive assessment of these 3 aspects. It is not like the Chen kingdom, where you can pick up a beautiful wife by just picking up a hydrangea. It is simply sloppy to the extreme. In addition to personal strength, this competition also takes into account the strength of the tribe. The first 2 rounds are based on the tribe. In this way, those tribes with a small number of people and lack of strength can't hold on to the end. This is also the purpose of the Wanyan tribe. Those small tribes are not qualified to marry the princess of the Wanyan tribe. Tang Ning was somewhat thankful. Fortunately, the first 2 games were played in a group of 3. His riding and archery skills were so good that anyone from those tribes could beat him to pieces in seconds. With Aina and Au, the average level of the three of them could still be above the passing line. Tang Ning returned to the Wen tribe and prepared to take a rest. Just as he lay down on the bed, Wang Yanyan rushed in and pulled him up from the bed. Tang Ning rubbed his sleepy eyes and said dissatisfiedly, "What are you doing? There are only 5 days left, and you are still sleeping." Wang Yanyan pulled him up and frowned, saying, "During these 5 days, you are not allowed to be lazy. Ride well and shoot well. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 714. Tang Ning was not lazy. Riding and archery is not like memorizing. Riding for a long time will make your butt hurt. Drawing the bow and shooting arrows is also a physical job. There are still 5 days before the competition. If he rides and practices archery every day, it is not certain whether he can lift his arms by then. How can he compete with others? We can't not train. Wang Yanyan thought about it and said, "Then practice less, 2 hours a day. Sharpening the spear before the battle, even if it is not fast, it will be bright." Tang Ning rode a horse for an hour every day, practiced archery for an hour, dragged his tired body back to the tent, took a comfortable hot bath, and lay on the bed, and didn't want to move at all. Wang Yanyan walked in from outside, sat by the bed, and asked, "Are you tired?" Tang Ning lay on the bed, dragged out the tail tone and said, "Tired. Let me massage you." Wang Yanyan said, and a pair of hands had already pressed on his shoulders. Tang Ning subconsciously wanted to refuse, but her massage was so comfortable. After a tiring day, being able to enjoy such a massage, all the pores on his body would relax. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, thank you." Including Zhao Man, he has already enjoyed massages from 2 princesses. Lan Lan is also a princess. Will there be a day in the future when Zhao Man, Li Tianlan, and Xiao Mania will massage him together? Tang Ning thought absent-mindedly and fell asleep unknowingly. Wang Yanyan helped him massage his shoulders, and soon, she slowly pounded his back, with a focused and serious look. Tang Ning slept very comfortably. When he opened his eyes, he was still lying prone. He turned over and found Wang Yanyan lying on the bed, and she was also asleep. He looked at Wang Yanyan, and a trace of doubt appeared on his face. Before he fell asleep, he vaguely remembered that Wang Yanyan sat on the bed, massaging his shoulders and pounding his back. This was not her style. She would never be so gentle in the past. She would only drag him up and fight for 300 rounds. Wang Yanyan was lying on the bed, leaning sideways, her eyelashes trembling slightly. As Tang Ning watched her closely, she found that the little girl was actually quite attractive. When she first met her, the wild beauty on her body had become restrained, and she seemed not so wild anymore. After all, she became the Khan. The little girl that Tang Ning could beat with one hand before, now couldn't take advantage of her even if she tried her best. Tang Ning sat up from the bed. It seemed that the movement was too big and affected her. Wang Yanyan suddenly woke up, looked at him, rubbed her sleepy eyes, and asked, "Does your arm still hurt? Do you want me to rub it for you?" Tang Ning was a little uncomfortable with the sudden tenderness and thoughtfulness of the little girl. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Do you have anything to ask of me?" Wang Yanyan shook her head and said confusedly, "No. There is no love without reason, nor is there hatred without reason." Without reason, how could the little girl be so good to him and serve him like a maid? Tang Ning looked at her, and suddenly a look of realization appeared on his face, and he said, "I know." Wang Yanyan looked at him and asked in confusion, "What do you know?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Are you not going to pay back the hundreds of taels of silver you owe me?" Wang Yanyan was speechless after what Tang Ning said. which showed that she was indeed aiming for the silver. Her tribe was so poor that she couldn't expect her to come up with hundreds of taels of silver, but she couldn't repay debts with her body. It was only natural to pay back debts. If she couldn't pay back the money, she would do a certain amount of physical labor. Others' massages cost a few cents each time, but she was a princess, so Tang Ning charged her 10 taels of silver. Even so, she still owed him dozens of massages. If she added the food Tang Ning gave her, the cost of his advice and the cost of taking risks to participate in the competition, she would have to serve him tea and water, massage his back and shoulders for the rest of her life to pay him back. Of course, Tang Ning was not a stingy person, so these were free services given to her. Wang Yanyan seemed to agree with this way of repayment, and she massaged his arms, which were a little sore from pulling the bow, with moderate strength. Tang Ning was enjoying her massage, and suddenly heard the sound of knife handles colliding in his ears. He and Wang Yanyan looked at each other and immediately ran out of the tent. On a grassy field not far from Tang Ning's tent, Lao Zheng and the middle-aged woman once again entered into a chopping match. Tang Ning once again took out a handful of melon seeds from his arms and gave half to Wang Yanyan. The two squatted on the grass and watched. Their fighting style was still so simple and rough. This time, the middle-aged woman lasted longer under Lao Zheng's hands, because Tang Ning and Wang Yanyan had eaten all the melon seeds, and they had not yet decided the winner. In the end, Lao Zheng was more skilled, because during a chopping match, the scimitar in the middle-aged woman's hand was chopped off. Old Zheng looked at the butcher knife full of gaps with some regret, and bowed to the middle-aged woman and said, "Sorry, I'm giving in again." Wang Yanyan ran over and asked in surprise, "Master, why are you here?" The middle-aged woman looked at her and said, "Arrange a big tent for me. I will stay here temporarily these days." Wang Yanyan nodded and said, "I will ask someone to arrange it." Watching old Zheng and the middle-aged woman fight is just for fun. The two of them hacked and hacked at each other, without any artistry. He still likes to watch Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao sparring. Those moves and actions are so good that those who don't know would think it's a dance. As soon as he returned to the tent, Lao Zheng's figure flashed in, looked at him, and asked, "Besides having no sword is better than having a sword, having no sword in your hand but having a sword in your heart, what else did the old beggar say?" One of the essences of human beings is indeed the fragrance, and even Lao Zheng is not immune to it. Wang Yanyan's master was able to gain an extra quarter of an hour under his command in just 2 days. This was enough to prove that what the old beggar said was right. The other party realized something from it. The stubborn old Zheng obviously did not realize the mystery in that sentence. Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "He also said that since he has no desires and desires since the palace, he will practice Qigong faster." Internal fighting broke out in Haimen, and Chen Chu temporarily suspended his troops, allowing the Sushan people to have a brief respite. During this period of time, things were not peaceful within the various tribes of Sushan. The three forces competed with each other, one ebbing and the other ebbing. Up to now, the fourth princess had completely overshadowed the eldest prince and the third prince, and became the subordinate of the Khan. The first sweat. Many people believe that if there are no accidents, the Khan, who has been ill for a long time, will soon pass the position of Khan to her. However, at this critical juncture, another competition to recruit a son-in-law came up, making the situation even more complicated and confusing. Wanyan Department, the main department, is a tent covering an extremely large area. A burly middle-aged man took a big bite of the leg of lamb, drank a few sips of wine, wiped the corners of his mouth, and asked, "How are the arrangements for the fourth princess going?" A person stepped forward and said, "Back to Khan, the eldest prince and the third prince are very enthusiastic about this matter, and the preparations are almost complete." After he finished speaking, he raised his head again, looked at the middle-aged man, and hesitated. "Khan really wants to watch them fight like this?" Wanyan Khan looked energetic and did not appear to be bedridden as rumored. He grabbed the mutton and took another bite. He said, "You don't understand. Only by fighting each other can wolf cubs become the best hunter." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 715. There was still one day left for the competition. Tang Ning did not ride a horse or shoot an arrow today. Wanyan Liang realized that she finally gave him a day off so that he could not drain all his energy. "I have a little wild horse that I never ride, the left side. I have a small whip in my hand and I spank her, and use the right side harder." Tang Ning closed her eyes and lay comfortably on the bed, humming a song and enjoying Wanyan's exclusive massage. Wanyan couldn't afford to pay back the money she owed him in a short period of time, so she decided to pay the debt with her body. But this was also for her own sake. Only when Tang Ning's physical condition was adjusted to its peak and she gave her best in the competition could she ensure that she would not be snatched away by someone like Butahanal. In history, apart from him, there should be no one else who treated the prairie princess as a maid. Thinking of something, Tang Ning opened her eyes and said, "If I win, I don't have to really marry you, right?" Wanyan glanced at him and said, "Even if it's fake, I still have to put on a show in front of the Khan." Tang Ning felt relieved and said, "It's just acting, that's fine. Hey, please be gentle." Wanyan gritted her teeth and asked, "Why, is it difficult for you to marry me?" Tang Ning was lying on the bed, unable to see her expression clearly, and said, "Of course, the tigress at home is very fierce. Please don't spread this matter. Hey, please be gentle, it hurts." Wanyan rode on his back and said, "It's okay if it hurts. Don't you Han people have a saying, pain means you can't understand? If you don't understand, you are sick. Pain is because you are sick. I won't beat you anymore, come down. Ah, be gentle, hiss." Tang Ning just wanted her to give her a slap on the back, but she almost had her bones broken. The service experience was too bad and she had to add more money from her debt. Wanyan returned to her own tent. Lao Zhen was chatting with the middle-aged woman and gesticulating with her hands from time to time. Ayana and Aya were preparing for tomorrow's competition. Everyone seemed very busy. Wanyan was almost beaten just now. After Yanzui died, Tang Ning returned to her tent, preparing to catch up on her sleep and use sleep to numb the body that had been damaged by her. At this time, in Wanyan's tent, she was holding a leather whip, sitting on a chair, and said with a cold face, "Bring me here." Chen Zhou was escorted up by two men. He glanced at Wanyan and said in a trembling voice, "Princess, isn't our grudge already settled?" Wanyan looked at him, a smile suddenly appeared on her face, and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm not here to settle a score with you." When Tang Ning woke up, she still felt a lot of pain in her back. The little wild horse is indeed a little wild horse, and it is no joke for the horse's hooves to fall on people. Chen Zhou came in to deliver food to him. Tang Ning lifted up her robe and said, "Please take a look at my back." Chen Zhou's hands trembled and he immediately said, "This subordinate has not betrayed you. Help me check if there are any bruises on my back." Tang Ning looked at him, paused, and asked, "What did you just say, what kind of betrayal?" "There is no betrayal." Chen Zhou shook his head and said, "My subordinate is talking about cups and plates. The dishes and cups here are too simple, no different from broken earthen jars. I will ask someone to bring some high-quality products next time porcelain comes." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "No need, there is no need to pay too much attention when you are away from home. If you break the earthen jar, just break the earthen jar. As long as it can be used." Chen Zhou sighed while helping him serve the soup. "It's not easy for the fourth princess to be here. If adults weren't here, she might not be able to defend her tribe. Based on her brains, she will definitely not be able to hold on." Tang Ning gave Wanyan a fair evaluation and said, "The eldest prince and the third prince are as good as anyone else. If nothing else, they are just talking about this contest to recruit a bride, they were able to sell her without any effort. Chen Zhou raised his eyebrows and asked tentatively, do you think the fourth princess is stupid? That's not the case. Tang Ning shook her head and said, she is just naive. Chen Zhou asked, what is your impression of the fourth princess? Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, why do you ask? Chen Zhou looked away and said, just ask. My impression of her. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said casually, she must be cute. Wang Yanyan and Zhao Man are very similar, both in terms of status and personality. The difference is that Zhao Man does not have such a heavy responsibility on her shoulders as she does, and of course he is not as wild as her Wei. The most striking characteristics of the two of them are that they are innocent and cute, simple-minded and single-minded. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are stupid and cute. There is only one word to describe such a girl, cute. Tang Ning looked at Chen Zhou and asked, why do you have so many questions today? My subordinate is talking too much. Chen Zhou immediately lowered his head and said, sir, have some soup. Tang Ning picked up the bowl, picked up the spoon, put it down again, and asked, isn't it tiger whip soup this time? It's not this time, Chen Zhou said, this time it's niubeo soup. Tang Ning felt relieved, picked up the spoon again, and asked casually, what is niubao? Chen Zhou said, it's the cow. Tang Ning asked in surprise, which one? Bovine testicles. The last time she drank his big tonic soup, Tang Ning still remembered the feeling of having to bend down when walking. Tang Ning looked at him, slowly put down the spoon, stood up, patted his shoulder lightly, and said, you have worked hard these days, and as a reward you drink up all this soup. Grown-ups. Don't ask. If you ask again, I'll make you drink a pot. Chen Zhou looked at Tang Ning's back as she walked out, then looked down at his hands and sighed. When Wang Yanyan saw Chen Zhou again, he looked pale, his steps were weak, his eyes were dull, and everything he saw seemed to be boring. Wang Yanyan stood up, looked at him, and asked expectantly, how is it, what did he say? Chen Zhou looked at her and said, my master said that the princess is very cute. Cute? Wang Yanyan's eyes were full of smiles, and she asked, that means he likes me. Chen Zhou shook his head and said, the princess is wrong. Wang Yanyan looked at him and frowned, how am I wrong? Chen Zhou looked at her and said, if a man likes someone, he will not say that she is cute. There is a saying that has been circulating in the capital. I wonder if the princess has heard it? Wang Yanyan said, what is it? Chen Zhou said, cuteness is worthless in front of charm. Wanyan tribe leader. Today is the competition day. The best young people from the 15 tribes of the Sushan people gathered here. Tang Ning and others also arrived in time. Ayana looked at him and said, in the first competition, you will play normally. I and Ayu will take care of everything. Tang Ning didn't have to worry about the first competition. Ayana and Ayu's riding skills could crush most people here. As long as 2 of the 3 people won, he would win easily. Tang Ning nodded, indicating that he knew. Wang Yanyan came over and looked at him, wanting to say something but stopping. Tang Ning found that she seemed to have something to say in the morning, but she didn't say it, so Tang Ning didn't bother to ask. Wang Yanyan looked at him several times, and finally couldn't help it. She came over, raised her head and asked, what is charm? Speaking of charm, Tang Ning thought of Sume. The 109th day since I last saw Sume, I miss her. Warm Ti. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 716. Charming, Tang Ning glanced at Wang Yanyan and said, why do you ask? Wang Yanyan rolled her eyes at him and said, it's not okay to ask. Tang Ning thought for a while and said, charming means a woman's extreme beauty and beauty, which can be extremely attractive to men. Wang Yanyan spoke Chinese well, but she still couldn't understand some words. Wei Nianyang thought for a while and asked, is Zhao Man charming? Zhao Man is the envy of Wan Yanyan because she has endless beautiful clothes and endless beautiful jewelry. In her eyes, extreme beauty, and beauty can be extremely attractive to men. That's what was used to describe her. Tang Ning shook her head and said, it doesn't count. Zhao Yingying is a pure and cute type, and the word charming has nothing to do with it. It doesn't count. Wei Nianyang thought for a while and then asked, is Ayana charming? If Aina were stronger, she would be a King Kong Barbie. She would have nothing to do with charm in her next life. Tang Ning continued to shake her head. Where's Ayu? It doesn't count. Wan Yanyan thought carefully and asked, then, what about me? You, Tang Ning looked at her childish face and couldn't help laughing. She waved her hand and said, are you kidding? Don't make trouble. Among all the people Tang Ning knew, Su Mei was the only one who could be described as charming. She always exuded an invisible magnetism that attracted people's attention. As for Wan Yanyan, she just needs to be cute. At her age, she is still unable to reach the level of charm. Wan Yanyan glared at him angrily, gritted her teeth and left without saying a word. Aina walked to Tang Ning, pointed into the distance, and said, the two people over there, the one on the left is Butai, and the one on the right is Hanel, who are also our main opponents this time. Tang Ning looked over and saw two tall men talking and laughing. Although they were far apart, the impression these two men gave him was still very strong. In a fight with real swords and guns, Tang Ning would be more than 90% no match for them. Tang Ning looked away and asked, how can we compete later? Aina said, first compete in riding skills. 15 tribes will draw lots to determine their opponents. One tribe will get a bite, and the other 14 tribes will be divided into 7 groups. Each group has 3 people. They compete in pairs. The winner of 3 games will be 2 or 3. Entering the next archery competition. Tang Ning asked, where is the losing tribe? Aina said, eliminate. Tang Ning was stunned for a moment and said, what you are doing is too unscientific. Aina asked doubtfully, science. Tang Ning explained, it's just unfair. If a strong force meets, wouldn't one of them have to be eliminated? Aina shook her head and said, this is the rule set by the eldest prince. If we lose, we have no chance, so we must win. The eldest prince obviously doesn't have a high level of education. How old is he, and he still uses this one-round knockout format? Even if he doesn't understand it, wouldn't he learn the format of Chengguo's 16th guard competition? Ayana looked at him and said, as long as we don't encounter Butai and Hanel, Ayu and I will win. You don't have to run away then. The result is the same whether Tang Ning runs or not. The riding competition is not just about riding a horse. There are many obstacles to overcome on the way, and the path taken is not a straight line. The requirements for the knight's level are very high, and even those with poor riding skills fall off the horse halfway. Possible. With his half-assed riding skills, compared with these guys who grew up on horses on the grassland, if the level of the horses is not much different, he can't outrun anyone. He looked at Aina, nodded, and said, it's up to you. After a while, someone announced the draw. Aina stepped forward, drew one, and then walked over and said, Butai has a bye, it's okay. Butai received a bye in the first round, which meant that they would not meet Butai. Ayu breathed a sigh of relief and asked, what number did we draw? Aina said, no 3. Ayu asked again, who is the other no 3? Aina shook her head and said, I don't know. What a coincidence, Ayana, the one you drew is also no 3, a figure walked over from the side, shook the lot in his hand, and said, we are also number 3. Ayu's expression changed and she said, Hanel. Hanel looked at him, with a smile on his lips, and said, I have long wanted to learn about Aina's riding skills. After he finished speaking, he laughed twice and strode back. Ayana's face darkened and she said, they did it on purpose. All this was arranged by the eldest prince. Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, why, can't we win? Ayana looked at Hanel and said in a deep voice, they are also riding good horses. Hanel has superb riding skills. It is difficult for me to beat him. The person next to him is Ishi, and Ayu is probably not as good as him. With your riding skills, you can't even win against Daji. If you lose all 3 games, we will be eliminated in the first game. Wei Nianyun hurried over and asked worriedly, are you competing with Handler in the first match? I nodded heavily. Wan Yunyun's face turned pale and she murmured, you can't compete with Hanel, and Ayu is no match for Ishi, so we are definitely going to lose. What can we do? Wait a minute. Tang Ning stretched out her hand to signal her to shut up. He looked at Aina and asked, your riding skills are not as good as Hanel's. Aina nodded. Tang Ning asked again, what's better than that? Aina said, it's easy to win against him. Tang Ning looked at Ayu again and asked, you can't compare to Ishi. Ayu nodded. Tang Ning continued to ask, what about Hida and Jabai? Ayu glanced in that direction and said, it's easy to win against him. What's the use of saying this? You are no match for Hanel. Wei Nianyun glanced at him, looked at Ayana and Ayu, gritted her teeth and said, you must win. Aina nodded and solemnly said, I will try my best. Ayu looked solemn and said, Princess, don't worry, I will definitely try my best to win against Yish. Tang Ning rubbed her eyebrows, looked at Yan Yan, then looked at Aina and Daji, and couldn't help but ask, are you all pigs? What did you say? Wei Nianyun pinched his ears angrily and said angrily, say it again. Tang Ning knocked her hand away, waved to the 3 of them, and said, come here. The 3 of them looked at each other with doubts on their faces, then slowly moved closer. Tang Ning said a few words in their ears, and the expressions of the 3 women gradually changed from doubtful to dull. Ayu looked at Tang Ning and said blankly, is this okay? Why not? Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, the eldest prince has stipulated that Aina must deal with Hanel. Do you have to deal with Ish? Ayu said, no, no. Isn't that enough? Tang Ning glanced at them and said, how about you use your brain when you are in trouble? I don't want to call you pigs. Therefore, there is no harm in reading more. As long as any of the 3 of them has read historical records, they will not be in the predicament just now, let alone think that they are destined to lose. Of course, expecting them, who couldn't even speak Chinese fluently, to read historical records was too much for Tang Ning. Wei Nianyun lowered her head, blushed, and stuck out her tongue in embarrassment. When she raised her head, her eyes towards Tang Ning had already begun to twinkle with stars. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 717. A grassland outside the main Wanyan tribe. Today is the day for the competition between the 15 warriors for the 4 princesses. This grassland is divided into 2 tracks. The grassland is not flat. There are countless obstacles along the way. Some require the horse to jump to pass, and some require the knight to get close to the horse's belly to ensure that he will not be blocked from dismounting. The equestrian competition on the grassland has never been about who runs faster. On such a track, the quality of the horse has little impact on the result. What is more tested is the knight's superb riding skills. Tang Ning stood on the sidelines and watched the 2 games. He felt more and more that there would be no war between Chen State and the grassland if it could be avoided. These people were born to ride horses, and the grassland is their home court. The soldiers of Chen State are at a great disadvantage when fighting them on the grassland. For him, it is an extraordinary performance to pass this kind of competition smoothly, not to mention competing with others in speed. Fortunately, He positioned himself as the inferior horse, which was nothing. Everyone has their own strengths. He was not good at riding, but he had other strengths. For example, brain. The Han people often called the grassland people barbarians, largely because they had no culture. The military books in the Hanlin Academy could fill a room, and all the generals of the state of Chen had to learn. The military is a trick. The superior military tactics emphasize the use of the weak to defeat the strong and the few to defeat the many. Wang Yanyan and Ian only knew how to fight head-on and never thought about using their brains. With the same number of people, the soldiers of the state of Chen could not beat them in a head-on fight, but if they played military tactics and tactics, they would definitely make them doubt their lives. They had never even heard of the most basic strategy of Tianji's horse racing, so how could they win? The first two games were quickly decided. 2 tribes successfully advanced and 2 tribes were eliminated. The next game was the turn of Tang Ning and Ian. As the first warrior in the tribe, Hanel naturally has to have the dignity of the first warrior. As the first warrior, he must be the first to appear and compete, so that he can show his identity as the first warrior. He rode his horse into the venue and looked at Aina outside the venue with a provocative look in his eyes. Aina smiled at him and handed the horse in her hand to Tang Ning. In Hanel's surprised eyes, Tang Ning walked forward with the horse and came to another track. Hey, why isn't it Aina? That Han man actually wants to beat Hanel, overestimating himself. Brother Hanel, don't show mercy, let him eat dirt behind. There came shouts from behind that Tang Ning couldn't understand. Judging from their expressions, it was definitely not a good thing. He silently said rebound in his heart and turned a deaf ear to it. Hanel looked at Tang Ning, frowned, and asked in stiff Chinese, why, where is Ayana? Tang Ning glanced at him and said, I am enough to deal with you. Hanel looked puzzled, obviously did not understand what Tang Ning said. Hanel was not as lucky as Wang Yanyan. He obviously did not have an excellent Chinese teacher, so Tang Ning was too lazy to pay attention to him. Seeing that Tang Ning ignored him, Hanel's face showed a trace of anger. He glanced at Tang Ning and said, I will let you know what real riding skills are soon. After calming down, he looked forward, waiting for the competition to begin. Everyone's eyes were also focused on Tang Ning and Hanel. With the sound of a gong, Hanel rushed out like an arrow from a string. He was seen holding the reins, dashing left and right, sometimes jumping high and jumping over obstacles, sometimes turning over and sticking to the horse's belly, dangerously passing through obstacles. His movements were neat and his skills were skillful, which attracted cheers from the onlookers. On the other hand, Tang Ning was slowly leading the horse, walking on the track, slowly crossing obstacles, and looking around. He didn't seem to be competing, but rather strolling. The horse under him didn't feel the tense atmosphere at all. Halfway through the journey, it even lowered its head to eat a few bites of grass, and then stopped where it was. Ha ha ha, this Han Chinese, can he ride a horse? Brother Hanel is almost at the finish line, we will definitely win. It's so funny, a person like this still comes to participate in the competition, go back and eat milk early. The difference between the two was very obvious, and everyone couldn't help but burst into laughter. At a certain moment, someone's smile froze on his face, and suddenly asked, Hanel 1, what about Yishi and Daji? Can Yishi beat Ayana? Is Daji a match for Ayu? Win 1 game and lose 2 games, won't we still lose? Someone's 4 consecutive questions hit everyone's heart, and the smiles on their faces gradually froze, and then disappeared. It's over. How can Yishi be Ayana's opponent? No one can beat her except Brother Hanel. When has Daji ever won Ayu in the annual horse race? Even if Brother Hanel wins, we still lose if we lose the next 2 games. Cunning Han people, they did it on purpose, they lost this game on purpose. Oh no, Brother Hanel fell into the trap. After thinking it through, everyone was in an uproar. No one thought that it was a must-win game in 3 games. How could it turn out like this? The winner is the one who wins 2 out of 3 games or wins all games. No matter how beautifully they win the first game, they still lose if they lose the next 2 games. On the track, Tang Ning pulled the reins, signaling the lazy horse under him to stop running. After all, they were still competing. Although he had no intention of winning, it was too much to just eat grass during the competition. The horse seemed to be full, raised its head again, and slowly walked forward. At this time, the sound of horse hooves came again on another track beside him. Hanel had already run to the finish line, turned back, and looked at Tang Ning with a winner's smile on his face. After glancing at Tang Ning, he continued to walk towards the starting point. This was a formal competition. The winner ran to the finish line and then turned back, which was undoubtedly the greatest humiliation to the opponent, but this was the humiliation that Hanel wanted. However, when he drove his horse back to the starting point, he found that the warriors in the tribe did not seem to be very happy for him. Yish and Daji lowered their heads and looked depressed. Hanel's good mood was gone halfway, and he asked with a gloomy face, "What's wrong with you, Yishi? The next round is your turn, why don't you get ready?" Yish looked up at him, pursed his lips, and asked, "Brother Hanel, you're done, who will beat Ayana? Isn't there still?" Hanel opened his mouth, his face suddenly changed, and he looked towards Ayana. At this moment, he finally realized that they actually wasted his chance by using the person with the worst riding skills. Yishi is not Ayana's opponent, and Daji is not as good as Ayu. In this way, no one will be able to beat them in the next 2 rounds. Ayana led the horse to the track, looked back at Hanel, and said, "Hanel's riding skills are indeed superb, Ayana is ashamed of himself." Although Ayana was praising him, this praise was particularly harsh in his ears. The third prince came over with a sullen face, glanced at him, and angrily said, "Idiot." Han Li lowered his head and dared not speak. It was clearly an absolutely overwhelming lineup, but they were turned into a losing game. They were eliminated before they even made it to the first round. How could they dare to explain anything? Although Ayana and Ayu were not very smart, they still had a very accurate assessment of their own and their opponent's strengths. Ayana easily defeated Yishi, and Ayu did not spend much effort to defeat Daji. In this way, they won the first game with 2 wins and 1 loss and successfully advanced. The seeded player Han Li could only regretfully stop in the top 15. Although Tang Ning lost the game, Ayu and Ayana did not underestimate him at all. He was able to turn the tide and turn a losing game into a winning one. This alone deserved their respect and admiration. Wan Yan smiled happily, tugged at Tang Ning's sleeve, and said, "Where do you get so many tricks, you bad guy, Fupin Chinese?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 718. Tang Ning ignored Wan Yan Yan until Ayu defeated De Ji and everything was settled. He breathed a sigh of relief and patted his chest gently. Wan Yan Yan looked at him and asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you?" Tang Ning looked at Ayuna and said unhappily, "Why were you so anxious just now?" Ayuna asked in confusion, "What's wrong with me?" Tang Ning rubbed his eyebrows and said, "You go up first. If they let De Ji go up, what will you do?" Ayuna thought about it, and cold sweat gradually seeped out of her forehead. If the third prince also played the same trick with them and used De Ji to deal with her, it would not be so easy for Ayu to defeat Yishi. In the end, they would still lose. Wan Yan Yan also realized it, looked in the direction of the third prince, and whispered, "Why didn't the third brother let De Ji go up first?" Tang Ning said, "Because they are pigs like you. When your teammates are pigs, it is best to ensure that the opponents are also pigs, so as to remain undefeated." Whether Hanel and the others were overwhelmed by anger or their brains were not good enough, they were able to win this round by a narrow margin, all thanks to God's blessing. Hanel came over with a gloomy face and said, You actually used such despicable means. When did Ayana become as shameless as the Han people? Tang Ning glanced at him and said, what despicable means? In the second match, won't you let Daji go first? Hanel looked at him with doubt on his face. Tang Ning knew that he didn't understand again, so he looked at Ayu and said, Ayu, explain it to him. Ayu looked at Hanel and said a few words in a gibberish. Hanel was stunned at first, and then he seemed to think of something and stood there in a daze, as if struck by lightning. He had already won the first game. Even if Daji lost to Aina in the second game, as long as Yishi won the third game, they would still have won 2 games. But he hadn't thought of this just now. Tang Ning looked at Ayu and said, tell him not to ride horses and shoot arrows all day, fighting and killing, and read more books, there is no harm. Ayu translated Tang Ning's words to him. Hanel stood in the yard, his face red and white. The third prince came over, looked at him and asked, what did they say to you just now? Hanel came back to his senses, touched his head, and said, no, nothing. The first game was horsemanship, and the second game was archery. The rules of archery are very simple. Just hit the target 20 feet away. There are divided areas on the target. The closer to the center of the target, the more points you get. The second game is not a best of 3 game, but 3 people each with 10 arrows. Finally, the total score is calculated, and the top 4 tribes will enter the third round of individual competition. Aina and Ayu can only help him here. With Tang Ning's archery skills, it is no problem to hit the scar from 20 feet away, but it depends on luck to hit the bullseye. Fortunately, Ayana's archery skills are extraordinary. Tang Ning has seen it before. During the female martial arts examination in the capital, she was one of the few people who scored full marks in archery. As for Ayu, you can guess how good her archery skills are from the fact that she carries a bow on her back all day. She and Ayana hit the bullseye with every arrow. Even if Tang Ning drags them down, the total score is still ranked 3rd. As for the third competition, it will be held tomorrow. After the results came out, Ayana looked at Tang Ning and said, it depends on you next. There is only 1 day left before the next competition. Tonight, everyone was placed in the tent of the main headquarters of the Wanyan tribe. Tang Ning sat in the tent, feeling a little irritated. He has been in the grassland for quite a while. Seeing that this year is already halfway through, this time next year will be the 3-year period he and Li Tianlan agreed on. But until now, he has not received any news from her. Even though no news is a good thing, he still can't help but worry. And things are not going well for Wanyan Yan. The eldest prince and the third prince are using their own methods to shake her position in the clan. If Tang Ning leaves, she will be eaten up in no time. Before she becomes the only person in power here, Tang Ning cannot leave. But her rise has been very rapid. I am afraid there will be a long period of stability. She can wait, but Tang Ning can't. He has been out for so long, and he has been anxious. The night is long, he wants Zhong Yi, Su Ryu, Su Mei, and Tang Yao Yao, but he can only think of Wanyan Yan. Wanyan Yan walked in from outside the tent, looked at Tang Ning sitting on the bed in a daze, and whispered, do you miss home? Tang Ning turned to look at her, sighed, and said, you have to work hard and strive to become the Khan as soon as possible. Wanyan Yan lowered her head and said, I can't become the Khan just because I want to. Forget it. Tang Ning knew that it was not good to force this matter on her, so he waved his hand. When he looked at her again, he finally found something different and said in surprise, what you are wearing is. Wanyan Yan did not wear her national costume this time, but changed into a Han Chinese dress. Judging from the style of the clothes, it was not an ordinary women's dress. The customs of the Chen kingdom were still somewhat conservative. Women would cover themselves tightly when they dressed. Wanyan Yan was wearing a Tang-style dress. The customs of the Tang dynasty were open, and the lady's clothes were more exposed than those of the Chen kingdom, revealing the collarbone and the whiteness under the collarbone. This kind of clothing will undoubtedly attract more men's attention, so in Chen state, serious women will not wear it. It is either for the wife and husband to have fun in the boudoir at night, or it is a way for the women in the brothel to attract customers. Wang Yanyan's figure is not tall, but her proportions are very good. She is not as feminine as a Han woman, but more wild as a grassland woman. More importantly, her figure is actually very material, which completely holds up this dress. It was also the first time for Wang Yanyan to wear this kind of clothes. She looked at him and asked with a blushing face, "Why, does this dress look good?" Tang Ning did not go against her will, nodded and said, "It looks good." Wei Nianyun asked expectantly, "So, charming?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Not charming." Wei Nianyun said angrily, "How can that be considered charming?" Tang Ning could understand her. Girls have always longed to be charming when they grow up. This is human nature. Wang Yanyan may have awakened this attribute recently. Since she had nothing to do, Tang Ning waved to her and said, "Go get the comb and bring the rouge and gouache." Wang Yanyan didn't like beauty before, but ever since she went to Chu State, rouge and gouache never left her body. Tang Ning first helped her unravel the braids one by one, combed them smooth, then tied them up, combed her hair in a style that Su Mei usually wore, and applied rouge. When she looked at it again, she felt completely different from before. The rouge covered the youthfulness on her face, and the mature hairstyle covered up the last trace of childishness. She finally looked like a charming young woman in front of her. Wei Nianyun couldn't wait to ask, "Are you charming?" Tang Ning looked at her and warned her, don't laugh, hold on. Even if you smile, don't smile like that." Wei Nianyun suppressed her laughter and asked, "Do you think I was better before or now?" "Before." Tang Ning said without hesitation. "No matter how charming she is not as charming as Su Mei. Everyone has their own strengths. Although she is not as charming as Su Mei is not as wild as her. It is actually very stupid to blindly pursue the strengths of others and give up her own advantages." The smile on Wang Yanyan's face froze. After a while, she walked out of Tang Ning's tent and said angrily, "Go and catch the person named Chen." Tang Ning was lying on the bed, thinking about Wang Yanyan's appearance just now, and couldn't help but feel a little funny. Women want to please their looks. The little girl has finally grown up and knows how to dress herself up, but every man likes different types. That just now, in short, she should ask his sweetheart, not him. What's more, if you like someone, you will like everything about her, whether she is pure or charming, it is all her. The current Wei Nianyun clearly does not understand this truth. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 719. When Tang Ning saw Chen Zhou the next morning, she found that he was walking with a limp. He asked in surprise, "What's the matter? Is your foot sprained?" Chen Zhou covered his butt that had been whipped, nodded, and said, "I accidentally sprained my foot last night." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "You should be careful when going out." Chen Zhou looked at Tang Ning and hesitated several times before finally asking, "Sir, is cuteness worthless in front of charm?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Who told you?" "This is what the capital masters say." "They don't know anything," Tang Ning said disdainfully. "There's something cute about being cute, and there's something charming about being charming. It's other people's freedom to choose what they like. Do they have any control?" Chen Zhou looked at him and asked tentatively, "What kind do you like, sir?" Tang Ning glanced at him and said, "I like them all. There is a very strange thing. Why do those people have to choose between cuteness and charm? Su Mei is charming and Zhao Man is cute. You can have both at the same time. There is no contradiction." He ignored Chen Zhou and walked towards an uninhabited pasture ahead. Today was the last and most important match of the competition. Before the competition officially started, he had to warm up first. After Tang Ning walked away, Chen Zhou turned to look at the tent behind him. When he saw Wang Yanyan walking out, he sighed and said, "I asked clearly, sir," he said he likes it. There are dozens of Sushan tribes, headed by Wanyan tribe. Among Wanyan tribe, there are 2 princes and 1 princess, and the 4th princess has the most tribes. But this time the Khan chooses the most powerful warrior for the 4 princesses to marry, which will change the situation in the clan again. If she marries into a tribe under the eldest prince and the 3rd prince, then the tribes in her hands will naturally be merged. At that time, it is not certain whether these tribes are in her hands or in the hands of the eldest prince and the 3rd prince. The Wuyan tribe was different. The Wuyan tribe was already under her. This time, the Wuyan tribe sent a Han to fight, and he actually squeezed into the last competition, which surprised many people. Many people who didn't know the truth were already talking about it before the competition started. Why did the Wuyan tribe send a Han man here, and the eldest prince actually agreed? It is said that the Han people have joined the Wuyan tribe and worshipped Bulma as their teacher. They are already half prairie people. The 2 games he won before were all based on Aina and Au. Otherwise, how could he have reached the end just by relying on him? What's the point of getting to the end? He is still no match for those warriors. I guess he will be beaten badly in a while. Before the competition started, Butai and Hanel were the most popular candidates to win, but unexpectedly, Hanel failed to win. After losing the competition, he left here at night yesterday. If he doesn't leave, he has no shame to see the 3rd prince again. Yesterday, in the 2nd horse race, if he had sent Daji to face Aina, even if he would lose to Aina, Ishi would still win against Au easily. After 2 games and 3 wins, they still won. If so, they were the ones standing here at the moment, but the Han man was full of tricks, and Han Li jumped into the hole he dug, and he couldn't blame others. However, today's competition is all about real abilities. The Han man managed to get through the first 2 levels with the help of Aina and Au, but today he has no such luck if he relies on him alone. Tang Ning came back from warm-up, and Aina also came back from the draw. Holding a lottery ticket in her hand, she looked at Tang Ning and said, "Your opponent is Hyoku of the Wendu tribe. Only if you defeat him can you meet Butai." After 2 matches, only 4 people were left, including Tang Ning. The one Tang Ning drew was from a tribe under the 3rd prince, and the one Butai faced was also from the eldest prince. If there were no surprises, Tang Ning was drawn. The winner of the group will be the one to challenge when the time comes, and it will be Butai. Wei Nianyun looked at Tang Ning and said with concern, "Hyoku is also very powerful, so be careful." Tang Ning looked at her and smiled, "I'm also very powerful." The contest between Butai and another man was not interesting. Both of them were subordinates of the eldest prince. The other party surrendered directly and Butai won. Although this has attracted criticism from many people, it is still within the rules. Aina looked at Tang Ning and said, "It's your turn." The venue for the competition was a fenced-in grassland, surrounded by people from various tribes who were watching. Tang Ning slowly walked to the field under the gaze of everyone. Hyoku was also a very burly man. Perhaps because the prairie people often ate meat, their bodies were generally strong, and their physical fitness was naturally higher than that of ordinary Han people. Tang Ning walked onto the court. Haku flexed his muscular muscles and cracked his joints. He looked at Tang Ning, grinned, and said in blunt Chinese, "Today, you are not as lucky as yesterday." Tang Ning looked confused and asked, "What did you say?" Haku raised his voice and said, "I said, you didn't have the one yesterday. You were lucky." Tang Ning rubbed her ears and said, "I didn't hear you clearly. Please say it again." Haku showed an impatient look on his face and said, "I said, you, at #%, *. Tang Ning looked at Haku, who was lying on the ground with his eyes rolled back, twitching and foaming at the mouth. A look of surprise appeared on his face. She hurriedly knelt down, shook him vigorously, and turned around and shouted to everyone, "Doctor, where is the doctor? Haku is suffering from hysteria, please come quickly." The crowd swarmed forward, talking all over the place, but no one blamed Tang Ning. After all, the competition hadn't even started yet, and there was no contact between Tang Ning and Haku. Haku suddenly fell to the ground and twitched. No matter how strange this was, it couldn't be blamed on him. The medical skills in the grasslands were not developed to begin with, and some methods even wished for the patient to die early. Seeing that no one was there to treat Haku, Tang Ning knelt down again, pinched his body, and symbolically tapped several acupuncture points on his body. At this point, Haku finally stopped twitching, but fainted directly. Tang Ning looked at Ayu, who was coming around, and said, "Tell them to take him down and let him rest in bed for 2 days." Ayu turned around and translated Tang Ning's words to everyone. Soon 2 people stepped forward and carried Haku away, and the way everyone looked at him changed from before. At #% %@. Tang Ning couldn't understand what they were saying, so she looked at Ayu, who explained, "They say you are a good person." "What the hell?" Tang Ning blushed and said, "Friendship first, competition second, this is what I should do." After Ayu translated Tang Ning's words, everyone's faces showed more kindness, and the atmosphere became more harmonious. Because Haku suddenly fell ill before the competition and was unable to participate in the competition, Tang Ning, like Butai, advanced easily. The results of their competition will determine who will be the future husband of the 4th princess. The competition between Tang Ning and Butai was scheduled for 2 hours later. He was sitting in the tent with Wei Nianyun standing beside him and said, "I know, what you just used was epilepsy goo. Master has used it before." She breathed a long sigh of relief and said, "When we fight Butai later, you can also use the epileptic goo to bite him, and we will win." Tang Ning shook her head. She was thinking too simply. It was a coincidence that the same thing happened once. If it happened a second time, someone would definitely connect it to him. The possibility that Butai and Haku would have seizures at the same time was too low. After the epileptic goo was used on Haku, it could no longer be used on him. After hearing his explanation, Wang Yanyan worriedly said, "What should I do? I won't lose the next game. In addition to epilepsy goo, I also have phantom goo, sleep goo, and itching goo." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "How do you want to win?" Wang Yanyan thought for a while and asked, "Is there a kind of poison that can be planted in a man to make him fall in love with you wholeheartedly?" "No." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Besides, I don't like men." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 720. Epilepsy goo is a highly poisonous insect that can temporarily paralyze people's nerves and cause symptoms similar to epilepsy. However, the toxin is temporary and will lose its effectiveness soon. The sequelae are very small and can cause weakness for 2 to 3 days. After a few days, you can be active again. Phantom goo is a poison that combines dozens of highly toxic mushroom toxins. It has a strong hallucinogenic effect and can be effective in a trace amount. Those who are affected by this goo will have a series of hallucinations. Some people dream of ascending to immortality, and some people dream of ascending to immortality. Dreaming about becoming a demon, the specific situation varies from person to person. As for the sleep poison and the itching poison, as the names suggest, one can make people drowsy and the other can make people itchy. Of course, these are all external manifestations. If the person who is affected by the poison does not remove the poison in time, it will have a great impact on the body. Hazards. Tang Ning knew many kinds of goo, but she still hadn't heard of the one Wanyan Yan mentioned. Goo insects can destroy people's bodies, but they cannot change people's hearts. If you like it, you like it, and if you don't like it, you don't like it, except for threatening the other party with voodoo insects. What kind of goo should be used to deal with butai was a question that Tang Ning needed to think about. The epilepsy goo can no longer be used. He is not yet proficient in using the phantom goo. As for the sleep goo and itching goo, they seem a little inappropriate. There are various competitions in the grassland every year. You can get many rewards by participating in the competition. This is to encourage the warriors to surpass themselves. The warriors on the grassland have long been accustomed to this. This time the competition is different from the past, because the prize of the competition is the fourth princess, and the winner can marry the fourth princess. For the warriors on the grassland, this is undoubtedly proof of identity and strength. Many warriors rush to sign up, and in the end those who remain are the best among the best. Of course, there are also leaders who make it to the end. The seemingly weak Han man barely passed the first two levels with the help of Aina and Ayu. He had no luck in the third level. His opponent suddenly became seriously ill and he was automatically promoted, but he actually persisted until the end. However, his good luck ended here. Because the opponents he is about to face are Butai, Hanal, Aina and others. They are the strongest people among the Sushan tribes. The first warrior in the grassland must be one of them. Among them, Hanal is especially good at riding, Aina is good at riding and shooting, and Butai is famous for his bravery. Compared with the strong Butai, the Han man looked as thin as a monkey. He was afraid that he would not be able to move even 3 moves under Butai. Before the competition even started, the sidelines were already filled with onlookers. Butai walked into the grassland, raised his hands in the air, and laughed twice. The crowd around him immediately burst into cheers. In contrast, the atmosphere was much quieter when Tang Ning entered the venue. Everyone looked at him with slightly pitiful expressions, as if they had anticipated his tragic ending. Wan Yanyan stood on the sidelines, holding Aina's hand, looking nervous, and asked, "Is he going to be okay?" Aina patted her hand and said, "Don't worry, he is very cunning and Butai will not be his opponent." "What a cunning plan!" Wan Yanyan glanced at her and said, "This is called cleverness." The grassland people advocate a kind of primitive violence. In this third competition, weapons are not allowed. Tang Ning walked into the venue, and Butai looked at him. He suddenly took a deep breath and laughed, "You Han people, why are men just like women? They smell good." "Does it smell good?" Tang Ning looked at him and said, "If it smells good, just smell it a few more times." Butai took a few deep breaths, grinned, looked at Tang Ning with teasing eyes, and said, "The last time the eldest prince and I went to grab things from your Han people's territory, the women we played with were just like this." After saying that, he shook his head and said, "It's a pity that when I caught them that time, all 5 of them died within a few days of playing." Tang Ning looked at him, the smile on her face faded, and said, "Then you really deserve to die." Butai grinned and said with a serious smile, "A 2-legged sheep also wants to take advantage of the 4th princess. The 4th princess belongs to me, Butai. Whoever touches it will die." Tang Ning looked at Butai, twitched her lips and said, "I insist on moving. Court death." Butai snorted coldly, and like a tiger out of its cage, he rushed towards Tang Ning and punched out hard. If an ordinary person was hit by this heavy punch, a few ribs would be broken at least. Tang Ning stood there, not dodging or dodging, and punched him in the same direction. Boom! After a dull sound, Butai trembled and steadied himself. Tang Ning took 4 or 5 steps back before standing still. She shook her sore fist, looked at Butai, and said with a smile, "It took a while." Butai frowned slightly, feeling that the punch he just fired was a bit weak. It was only 90% of what it was at its peak. The strength of the thin Han man was also somewhat beyond his expectation. "I will crush your bones piece by piece." His fist was also sore and numb, he said in a cold voice, and then rushed forward again. Boom! Bang bang! Bang bang bang! The two of them had no weapons, just a simple hand-to-hand fight, punching to the flesh. The onlookers could clearly see that Butai's strength was superior to that of the Han. But at this moment, no one in the field cheered and shouted for Butai. They looked at the two figures fighting on the field and held their breath. No one thought that the Han man's thin body actually contained such great power. Although he is not as good as Butai, among all the people present, how many can be so head-on with Butai? His strength, as well as his courage to fight back and never give up, have won the respect of many people. Wang Yanyan looked pale and said in panic, "Why doesn't he use Gu? He is seeking a breakthrough." A voice came from behind her. Wang Yanyan turned around and said, "Master." The middle-aged woman looked at the field and said, "When people are in danger of life and death, they can burst out unprecedented potential, and it is easier to break through bottlenecks and comprehend new realms." Wang Yanyan hurriedly asked, "Will he win?" The middle-aged woman looked at the field and said, "Just watch." On the field, Tang Ning and Butai punched each other again. Butai retreated 2 steps, and he retreated 3 steps. Although his fists had been numb for a long time and he felt severe pain, this refreshing feeling made him feel full of strength. When he competed with Tang Yao Yao, she would show mercy to him. When he competed with Wang Yanyan, he could not squeeze out his full potential. When facing Butai, he really found the feeling of being an opponent. Compared to Tang Ning, Butai's face was pale and he was terrified. He could sense that in this short period of time, the opponent's strength had been increasing, while his own strength was constantly draining away, and his punches became weak and powerless. He had never felt this way before, or rather, his physical strength was far from being exhausted. At this time, Tang Ning had already stepped forward again, laughing and saying, "Come again." Boom! Butai punched Tang Ning's shoulder, and Tang Ning slapped his chest. Tang Ning took a step back, and Butai took 2 steps back. Bang! The two punched each other again. Tang Ning did not move at all, and Butai took 3 steps back. Butai roared, rushed up again, and punched Tang Ning's head. Tang Ning reached out and grabbed his wrist, and with his other hand, he bent his elbow and hit it hard, saying lightly, "This arm is for the first girl you ruined." Crack! One of Butai's arms was bent at a strange angle. "Ah!" he screamed in pain and swung his other hand. Tang Ning held his fists with both hands, and then clenched his right fist and smashed his elbow joint, saying coldly, "Second place." Crack! Butai's elbow immediately bent outward. His face was pale, beads of sweat rolled down his forehead, and his arms drooped weakly. Tang Ning did not let him go, and kicked him twice at the knees. Third place, fourth place. Butai's limbs were broken and he lay on the ground in a big letter shape. Tang Ning kicked him in the crotch with one last kick. Fifth place. Bang! Butai's body moved forward a foot, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to let us know. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 721. After a fierce fight, Butai lay on the grass with all his limbs severed, unknown to him. The eldest prince suddenly stood up from his chair and looked at Tang Ning with murderous intent in his eyes. The third prince's face was solemn and his eyes were fixed on Tang Ning. Because of Tang Ning's victory, the plan launched by the two of them against Wang Yanyan completely failed at this moment. A figure ran into the field and looked at Butai, who was lying on the ground with a horrified look on his face. He swallowed, looked at Tang Ning and said loudly, "Tang Ning wins." Tang Ning breathed a sigh of relief. After thinking about it, he decided not to use some powerful poison on Butai. The fragrance Butai smelled was actually a kind of poison. This kind of poison is not very toxic, but it will slowly make people weak, one by one. When Butai's fist becomes weak and weak, he will naturally be at the mercy of Tang Ning. This method is a step-by-step process and is not easy to detect. Tang Ning will be under a lot of pressure at the beginning, but will become more and more relaxed. Butai is just the opposite. He originally didn't want to cripple Butai's limbs, but after listening to his words, he controlled the anger in his heart and regarded the Han people as cattle, sheep, pigs, and dogs, and ravaged and killed such a crazy person. He was allowed to live. Tang Ning has done her best. This process was very arduous. Before Butai's strength was greatly weakened, Tang Ning had to resist with all her body. When she heard the man announcing the result, the tight strings in her heart relaxed. She felt her vision go black and she fell over. Wang Yanyan ran over quickly, supported him before he fell to the ground, looked at the referee, and said quickly, "Quick, call the doctor." The referee looked at Tang Ning, then at Butai, and said, "Princess, Leader Butai seems to be injured more seriously. Stop talking nonsense and go quickly." In Wanyan department, somewhere in a tent, Butai was lying on the bed, staring straight at the ceiling, his eyes out of focus, like a dead person. In fact, there is no difference between him and the dead. All his limbs are broken and he can only lie in bed for the rest of his life. To him, this is the same as death. The eldest prince stood in front of the window, his face extremely gloomy. Several men looked indignant, looked at the eldest prince, and said, "Eldest prince, you must avenge brother Butai. We can't let it go. Let them pay with blood." The eldest prince stretched out his hand to signal them to be quiet. After he pondered for a moment, his eyes filled with unprecedented murderous intent. He looked at Butai and said, "When the time comes, I will hand him over to you." He walked out of the big tent, and the two people waiting outside the tent immediately followed him. Someone came close to his ear and whispered, "Eldest prince, the fourth princess has returned to the Wen tribe. Summon the leaders of Pucha and Tushan and tell them that I have important matters to discuss with them." The eldest prince glanced at him, then looked away, and whispered, "I have given you a chance, this is all you forced me." When Tang Ning woke up, her whole body was still sore. He struggled to get up and asked, "Where is this?" "You're awake." Wanyanyan held her chin up and dozed off little by little. When she saw Tang Ning waking up, she immediately woke up and said, "This is the Wen department. We have returned to the Wen department." Tang Ning asked, "Where is Butai?" Wanyanyan said, "The doctor said he can only lie in bed for the rest of his life." Tang Ning lay back on the bed and said, "It's better to do this kind of harm just by lying on the bed, instead of running out and harming others." Wanyanyan looked at the exposed bruises on his shoulders, looked at him, and asked, "Why did you work so hard yesterday? You can obviously use goo. If you want to pretend, just pretend to be more realistic." Tang Ning shook her head and said nonchalantly, "A little injury doesn't matter." Wanyanyan asked tentatively, "Is it because of me?" Tang Ning glanced at her. "Isn't this nonsense? If it weren't for her, why would he fight so hard with Butai? He is still bruised and bruised." He looked at Wanyanyan and asked, "I've deposed Butai, so the eldest prince won't cause trouble for you, right?" Wanyanyan shook her head and said, "Fists and feet have no eyes. Things on the test field are about life and death. He has no reason to cause trouble for us." She looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Why are you so cruel to Butai? His hands and feet are broken, and he will only be a useless person for the rest of his life." Thinking of what Butai had done, Tang Ning felt angry again and said angrily, "He deserves it." Seeing his angry look, Wei Nianyuan felt a burst of joy and sweetness in her heart, and couldn't help but feel a little absent-minded. Chen Zhou walked in from the outside carrying a tray and said, "Sir, it's time for you to apply the medicine." Wang Yanyan gave him a look, and Chen Zhou coughed slightly and said, "My subordinate is suddenly in a hurry. Could you please help Her Majesty the Princess to do it for you?" Wang Yanyan waved her hand and said, "You go ahead, I'll just come." Chen Zhou strode out. Tang Ning looked at Wang Yanyan and said, "This is not good, we should wait for Chen Zhou to come back." Wang Yanyan glanced at him and said, "Are you going to use the hand that he just used to relieve himself or relieve himself to apply the medicine to you?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "It's better you do it." It's okay for Wang Yanyan to help him apply the medicine. Anyway, there is no difference between him and Tang Ning's maids these days. Tang Ning will not refuse Qing Er to give him the medicine, and naturally she will not refuse Wang Yanyan. What's more, to apply the medicine, you only need to take off your shirt, not your pants. He took off his coat, then his lining, and said, "Come on." Tang Ning used to care about his body shape. After coming here, he has a more symmetrical body shape because of martial arts training. He looks thin and weak when he is dressed, but when he takes off his clothes, his well-proportioned muscles are revealed. His muscles are not as high and curly as Butai or Hanel, but well-proportioned and beautiful at first glance. Wang Yanyan stared at his naked upper body. Tang Ning stretched out his hand and waved it in front of her eyes, saying, "Don't look at it, apply the medicine." Wang Yanyan blushed slightly, took out the white ointment from the tray, and evenly applied it to the bruises on Tang Ning's body. Judging from the expression of the little girl, his body is still attractive to her. This surprised Tang Ning. He thought that women from the grasslands all liked tall and mighty men, and were not interested in his well-proportioned beauty. Now it seems that Wang Yanyan is different from them. At least her aesthetic taste is normal. The ointment prepared by the imperial physician was cool and comfortable to apply on the body. After applying the ointment, Wang Yanyan looked at him and asked, "What do you want to eat today, my husband? I'll ask them to make it for you." Sweet and sour pork tenderloin, beggar's chicken, squirrel fish, and stir-fried cauliflower. Tang Ning thought and said. After realizing something was wrong, he looked at Wang Yanyan and asked, "What husband?" Wang Yanyan looked at him and said, "As a matter of course, if you win the competition, you will be my husband. Do you want to regret it?"